The Select Panel on GST has indeed adopted that report. We have Supriya Shrinate joining us live. Supriya, take it away. It was bound to be a stormy monsoon session, and now you have the Select Panel on GST report, GST adopting that final report. Tell us more. What does this mean? Does this mean that we can see the GST becoming a reality sooner than we thought?
It's $1 million question, because look at what the flashes say. They say that members have been given a day's time to submit their dissent note, and the dissent note is going to come from the left and the Congress party. If you do a quick mathematics there, the Congress with its allies, barring the left, has about a 76-odd member there. They need about 85 to stall the GST in the upper house, and which is a question that I did put forward to Anand Sharma earlier in the day today. He said, we will not let a half-baked GST go through. The government has to heed to our suggestions. The fact is that the government's got the rest of the opposition on its side, be it the TMC, be it the SP. It's the AIA-DMK, it's the left, it's the Congress that is opposing the GST in its present form. But it's important to tell our viewers what has really been adopted by the Select Panel right now. What has really been adopted by the Select Panel right now is the GST, in which the government seems to have relented to compensate the state for the first 5 years for any revenue loss. So that's point number one. But it has not conceded to the demands of the opposition, which primarily the Congress, which asked for a 1% additional levy by states to go away, because they said this is going to disrupt the market. That is a part of the report. They have not given into that. They have also not given into petroleum, alcohol and electricity being included as a part of the GST regime. They're going to keep that outside, and I think that is one of the big negotiation grounds for the government and the opposition. So really, those are the big flashes that's coming right now. The GST report, as has been adopted by the Select Panel of Parliament, talks about 5-year compensation, and that's the screaming headline. It does not talk about doing away with the 1% additional levy. It also does not talk about doing away with or including petroleum, alcohol and electricity. That was the big bone of contention, even though it may disrupt markets, even though it may lead to a higher GST rate, because this is going to give states an additional bit. So that's really, as far as GST is concerned, it is going to be a very stormy session of monsoon, and one can't deny that, can we?
Absolutely, nobody can deny that, Supriya. Thank you so much. First of all, putting that in perspective for us, we are sticking to this big story that's flashing at the bottom of the television screens and to the left or right of me. And we have Gaurie Dwivedi as well joining us. Gaurie, the report has been finalized, but as Supriya just pointed out, important obstructions that the opposition had about the 1% state levy or the inclusion of alcohol and petroleum products, so both of them are not addressed in this as of now. So what is your take on the whole thing?
Well, Krishna, that's correct. The report has, of course, excluded these crucial items, and that has been one of the biggest bone of contention as far as this entire GST bill is concerned. The important bit is that Congress has submitted its dissent note on the issue. In fact, 1 day has been given to the members as an extension for them to submit a dissent note. It is expected the left parties would also be submitting their dissent note on the GST bill. But on a whole, the government has definitely managed to get some opposition parties on board and to try and build some kind of a consensus on this issue. The big thing, of course, really remains to be seen whether or not it can ensure that the Parliament actually functions, and that is a huge question mark right now, because fireworks are expected to happen in this session, and that, of course, means that the GST bill already has a very, very tight timeline, and any delay, of course, will mean that the April 2016 rollout could, in fact, be very, very ambitious for the government.
Gaurie, stay with us. Tell us, the upcoming monsoon session is expected to be stormy, and this will, be discussed and be the front and center of all discussions in the monsoon session. But the way it stands right now, the way it is that this particular report has been accepted, does it, give any chances of GST actually sticking to its timeline, or even that is not clear despite the panel accepting this final report?
Well, Krishna, April 2016 is the which the government is working towards, which is why the Select Panel was also given a very, very strict time to submit its report, which is by the end of this week, Friday, it is supposed to submit its report, and in fact, which is why work has also been done. However, the big issue really depends whether or not opposition parties can, in fact, allow the government to function. And we have with us a key opposition leader joining us, that is Mr. D. Raja from the left, who, in fact, will be submitting a dissent note. Let's of course speak to him.
Hello.
Hi. Gaurie, if you can help us with the guest who's with you right now.
No, I am Raja from Communist Party of India.
Hi, sir. This is Supriya, Shrinate. I'm joining in from ET now. Thanks very much for being with us. So the Select panel has endorsed and accepted the report. Do we expect a dissent note coming in from the left? The Congress says they're going to give a dissent note. You have a day's time. Could you fill us in with the details of what your strategy is going to be?
On one or two issues, we will stress our positions. Even Congress party is likely to give some dissent note. The time has been given by forenoon tomorrow. Those who wish to give some dissent notes, they can submit. That is the understanding. But the report has been adopted.
All right. So very quickly, I want to ask you, the position that has been changed in this report from the previous one really is Section 19 amendment. Are we right on that? Has the report now said that the government must compensate the states for any revenue loss for the first 5 years? Has that been adopted? I want to take several points with you, but I want to start particularly with that point.
Has been accepted. That has been accepted. 5 years. Period of 5 years.
And what about the demand as far as the 1% additional levy by states was concerned? You wanted it to be aborted because it is largely believed this is going to disrupt the markets. What about the other demand that you wanted, petroleum, alcohol?
Yeah, those things, there is no change. Even only that the GST Council, the weightage to the central government, 1/3. And there is a view, it should not be 1/3, it should be 1/4. On that point, there can be a dissent note like that.
Fair point indeed. So there can be a dissent note on that. So I basically wanted to understand from you, and you've been a parliamentarian for years now, was the principal opposition, the Congress and the left, giving a dissent note on this and the government relenting on only one of the many demands that had been put forward? What is the likely fate of the GST bill? Will it test the floor of the House test? The floor of the House test?
I think so, because Congress party also, as a matter of principle, they are not opposing GST bill. They are not opposing, but they would like to raise their concerns strongly. That's a different thing. But it is a constitutional amendment bill. House must be in order. In the monsoon session, whether House will be in order because of other issues, one has to wait and see what happens tomorrow. Because the scams are haunting the whole nation, and the political parties are also agitated on this issue. So if Parliament is in order, functions in order, then only this constitutional amendment bill can be taken up. We'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow. But as of now, even Congress party, in principle, is not opposed to GST legislation bill.
So I want to understand from you, because you understand the economic implications of what the Congress is calling a half-baked, a half-prepared bill. And which is why I want to understand from you, sir, that what is the economic implication of something like this? If you keep petroleum, alcohol and electricity out, I mean, petroleum and alcohol are two of the biggest tax grossers, so to say. Alcohol, there's a lot of black marketing that happens. What is the economic implication of keeping these things out? I want to ask you that question, and then I'm going to move to the 1% state levy.
Now, there are state governments, some state governments do not want tobacco to be in the ambit of GST. Some governments do not want petroleum products to be in the ambit of GST. So this has to be taken note, because state governments are the main stakeholders as far as GST is concerned. And one cannot brush aside the views expressed by the state governments.
Fair point indeed. Sir, I also have one more question of on the whole GST report which has been adopted. I know the report talks about 1% additional levy for the states, for the GST to go through. Isn't that going to disrupt the market? We are talking about a uniform tax market, and yet we give the states this privilege to do so. As it is, our GST rate, we're given to understand, is going to be about 18%, which is fairly high. Isn't that distorting the market and belies what is actually a uniform tax market and should be?
There is an issue, this 1% additional tax, will it have cascading impact? There are some committees which are working on it to assess what will be the cascading impact. So let us see. There are certain issues which remain open, according to me.
So do you believe there could be a certain amount of give and take? Do you believe there could be a certain amount of relenting even by the union government on something like this?
No, there is a GST council. There can be grievances, the disputes between states and the center. So there are issues how these grievances or disputes are going to be settled. That is another area where we will have to wait and see how this mechanism is going to work.
So very quickly before I let you go, you obviously want the representation of the centre to come down to 1/4 from the 1/3 in the council. You obviously want the...
That is where I have a problem. I was arguing that even this 1/3 weightage, why 1/3 weightage to the central government? But there is an argument 1/3 should be there for central government. I find there are views it should be, or it can be 1/4 central government. So because speaking on cooperative federalism is all right, but what about fiscal federalism? Nothing should take away the rights of the state governments. In fact, these state governments are asking for more powers. These are all certain questions which need to be answered in the coming days.
Fair point indeed. These are questions that need answers, and which is why I'm going to ask you the 5-year compensation that the that the report talks about, and something that is perhaps acceptable to the government. Does that not squeeze the government's own revenues, considering according to the 14th Finance Commission, there is going to be a higher devolution to states in any case? Isn't the government's own revenue going to be under pressure? Was there a really tearing need to compensate the states, especially when you're keeping petroleum and alcohol out of the GST ambit?
There are state governments. What about the finances of state governments? The 14th Finance Commission really, it gives through one hand, it takes away through other hand. That's what we have been seeing. State governments are complaining. The 14th Finance Commission actually has deprived many states of their funds. Northeast states are complaining. Even states like Tamil Nadu is complaining. They are losing out due to Finance Commission recommendations. So there are issues. Independent of what the GST is going to do, there are issues of finances and financial powers of state governments. One has to look at all these issues. After all, India is a country where we give emphasis to federal system of governance, and the state governments are asking for more powers, and the decentralization of power has become demand. And in the GST is all right. The purpose is to create a common economic market and economic zone. But at the same time, we'll have to see India is India, and the state governments are there as units, and how to get them on board, and that is the issue.
Thank you very much for taking time out and talking to us, Mr. Raja. We really appreciate you joining us right here on ET Now. Let's take it across to Saugata Bhattacharya, who is joining us right here on ET Now. Thanks very much, Saugata, for being with us. We also have Mr. Mariwala, and we've got Mythili Bhusnurmath as well. All of them joining in to talk about that big story. This is really the big game-changing reform as far as India is concerned. Many people believe this is perhaps the most important decision that has been taken in independent India as far as taxation goes, and it looks like it's a step closer to reality. Saugata, thanks very much for being with us. We've been telling our viewers that the select panel has adopted the GST report. Just for the benefit of our viewers and to fill you in with details, they've agreed on a 5-year compensation for the states, but they have not given in to the demands. The states can go ahead and levy a 1% additional levy. There can, of course, be a petroleum alcohol and electricity will be left out, and the centre will be represented by a 1/3 membership in the council of the GST. So my first question to you is, we've come so far as the GST is concerned, but is this the GST we wanted, and is it going to be finally a reality?
Sorry, so this is definitely not the GST that all of us would have liked to have seen, but the alternative seems to be no GST. So I guess in a environment of probably the 4th best or the 6th best or the 7th best, this is the pretty much the best that we can do, given the political compulsions, given the structure of federalism in the country. I think this is pretty much the best we can do. So the only hope is that if this now actually gets tabled in the current form that you mentioned, with the caveats and with the exemptions, etc. We keep on hearing that this bill would have in its pristine form would have boosted GDP growth by about 1.5%. So even if you assume that this boosts GDP growth by half that amount, we still have about 60,000 crores to play around with, and it does begin to provide a semblance of some integration of markets, some markets at least. So I guess in this environment, the 6th best solution is better than a no solution.
Fair point indeed. This is better than no solution at all, and like you're calling it the 6th best solution. We've got a Corporate India representative, Mr. Mariwala, joining us as well. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Mariwala. I want to first talk to you about the big picture and then get into the specifics of the GST. Which are the sectors that are likely to benefit the most from the introduction of the GST, and what could be the overall benefit for the Indian economy? Most people believe it could have added a 1.5%, 2%, but in this form, what is your correct assessment?
See, I think first of all we must realize that the overall ease of doing business will become much easier. It will become very, very simple. It will be a level playing field. For many sectors, the unnecessary differentiation which was happening because of either high incentives given to a certain sector or the differentiation between services and industry, the small and the large differentiation, all that will vanish with GST. So that's one big change, that I think it will put everybody on a level playing field. Number two, the compliance will increase, because if you have to claim a set-off, then you have to, so everybody will be forced to comply. And I think that's, and if you're not complying, then there will be disincentive for you, because then you suffer. So I think that itself will add a lot to compliance, and I think that will improve the overall tax collection. So life will be simpler, it will be a level playing field, and also I think it will raise the taxation. Secondly, I think in terms of logistics cost also it will reduce dramatically. Currently most companies have a depot in each state to avoid the central sales tax, and once the GST comes in, then you just need to have a few depots in the country and need not be a state. So the logistics cost and storing cost at each state will go down. So a lot of benefits to consumer product companies, durable companies, and to all the stakeholders, whether it is the government, center, the states, the consumer, or the trade. So all in all, it's a win-win situation, but provided that I think it's drafted well and I think the rates are reasonable, because the rates are very, very high, then it may lead to tax evasion, and it may just not, as well as the 1% thing which they're talking about. I think they should start off with a clean wicket in terms of a 5-year guarantee, but without the 1% tax.
All right, I'm going to just come back to you and talk about the high tax rate and how corporate India is rather worried about that. Mr. Poddar is also here with us on ET Now to talk about this big game-changing reform. You've obviously figured out that the select panel has adopted a report. Many people believe this is going to be a half-baked GST, but do you believe we are closer to that regime as a reality today than we were ever before? Mr. Poddar?
Well, I really have my doubts, because if the Congress is opposed to all the recommendations coming out of the Select Committee, then there is very little hope of the Rajya Sabha approving the bill without a big fight. And if the Congress decides to actively oppose the bill, then it will be difficult for the government to secure 2/3 majority for approval of the bill. Now, without their majority, then it's really a wait-and-see attitude as to how the monsoon session will play out in Rajya Sabha. Even if the bill is cleared by the Rajya Sabha, Congress can still delay the bill because they have a majority, basically they form governments in 12 of the states, and the bill has to be ratified by 50% of the states also. So there is another hurdle if the Congress is not very supportive of the bill. In my view, there was an opportunity for the government to accept the recommendations of the Congress party and make it a unanimous approval of the bill, because what Congress is asking are very reasonable recommendations. They are not political. They are genuinely designed to improve the overall structure of the GST and make it not half-baked but a complete meal. For example, they were recommending that the 1% tax on interstate movement of goods be abolished. They were also recommending that the base be broadened to include petroleum, alcohol, electricity, and a few other items of that nature. Now, those are very worthy recommendations, because by including electricity in the base, you lower the cost of production of electricity. By including alcohol in the base, you bring down the overall tax rate. By bringing in petroleum, you provide a boost to exploration and development of petroleum. So for all of these reasons, I thought it was quite reasonable for the government to provide support to the Congress recommendations. I don't really care which recommendations are made by which party, but these are highly desirable features of the GST which are missing in the current bill.
You know, you have raised many points, and I want to talk specifics with you, but we've also got Mukesh Butani on the phone line joining us. And so let me just take a very quick question to Mukesh there. You've understood that the select panel has adopted the report, and like Mr. Poddar was pointing out there, many of Congress's demand has not been taken into consideration. The only demand that has been taken into consideration as far as the opposition is concerned is a 5-year compensation for the states. How are you viewing this GST bill? I mean, I'm going to talk a little later about whether it can test the or pass the test on the floor of the House in Rajya Sabha. But first up, a GST which is not broad-based, a GST which allows states to levy taxes. What's your take? Should we be happy, celebrate this GST, or be sad that this is neither here nor there?
Well, we all know that the entire implementation of GST law is more about politics and less about economics, and that the politics has been overriding the economic considerations. I think the compensation formula moving from 3 years to 5 years is a step forward. I think if you look at the fine print and in terms of recommendations that has come in, some of the states felt that the 3-year also was not kind of mandatory, so they have used the word shall, which makes it mandatory. So I think this is one step forward. I think the issue on the 1% levy in lieu of CST is more an industry issue rather than a political issue, because I think what the industry is worried about is that this 1% can go higher if you look at the cascading impact of taxes. Though the rationale for levy of 1% is not to take away the revenues that were otherwise would have been earned under the erstwhile CST law by the originating state, but I think it just pushes up the impact of the overall indirect tax levy. And I think that the select committee seems to have latched onto that industry issue. It's a very important consideration. Clearly, the industry is not happy with that. But then the question is, should we have a GST law which should be put into implementation now, or should we defer to figure out a perfect solution for an ideal GST as we understand in many parts of Europe? So I think it's still a debatable issue whether we have the GST law in place or not. But I think moving away from 3 years to 5 years, insofar as compensation to states is concerned, is a step forward. Now, obviously, it has to be tested at the floor of the House whether there is consensus with the largest opposition political party or not, because if there is none, then I guess the wait is going to be long.
Fair point, indeed. I think you've really put the nail on its head. And like Mr. Poddar and Saugata was also pointing out there, this is the 6th best that we could have got, and we should be perhaps making a peace with it. Mythili, I want to come to you. You know, the point that everybody has raised so far, the main opposition strictly opposed to the provisions. They have, however, said they're not in principle opposed to the GST. And like Mr. Poddar was pointing out there, some of their demands are not political in nature. They're just asking for a better GST. Having said all of that, do you think the GST can pass the Rajya Sabha floor test when and if the Rajya Sabha does function?
Well, it all depends on how good the government is at managing the floor of the Rajya Sabha. If it is able to get, create dissonance amongst the various opposition parties and get some of them to vote with the government, it might pass the Rajya Sabha test. Because particularly now that we've been referred to a parliamentary standing committee, and the committee, after all, it is by and large, most decisions are taken on the basis of consensus, it should not be that difficult, but it all depends on the government being willing to eat a little humble pie publicly also perhaps, and then show that it is willing to extend an olive branch, as it were, and ensure that in the interest of the country's economy in particular, they are willing to kind of make small modifications. I think there are reports which suggest that the bill has been modified in ways that should assuage the fears of a large number of the states. So clearly, I think the chances are better now than before.
All right, the chances are better now than before. Harsh Mariwala, the Congress still is opposing the GST. They should be eating the humble pie as far as the government is concerned, says Mythili. Are you disappointed at the political grandstanding of the main opposition party, or do you, like Mr. Poddar, whose view I share with, believes that there is a certain amount of substance to what they're saying right now?
I don't know. I'm not a politician, so I think it's let's leave that subject to the politician. But looks like I think they are going to raise other issues, the Vyapam scam and many other things which have been in the cooking in the last 1 month. So I don't know. It's purely a political issue. If politics dominates economics, then it's not good. But now I think we have to see what happens, and hopefully it'll go through.
All right, I have time for closing comments, and I'm going to go to Saugata Bhattacharya. You did say that this is the 6th best we could have got, and we should in fact make our peace with it. What do you make of the 1% additional levy to states? Because this does disrupt the market, doesn't it? I mean, you already have reportedly an 18% GST rate to top it with the fact that petroleum and alcohol is going to be out of it, and then of course a 1% additional levy by the states. Why have a GST in the first place?
Well, I mean, as we said, I mean, remember that this is just a matter of even more than politics. This is a matter for state revenues, which is very important. So, I mean, all the transit taxes, etc., that states used to levy is now gone. So, I mean, obviously, manufacturing states would want some part of that levy to be given back to them. So, I mean, this is not just politics. I think there's some economic rationale for bringing about a compensation for lack of revenues. I would have thought the compensation that the centre had decided would exactly have taken care of this, but I'm not sure what the contours are of what losses states have computed amongst themselves and how they are distributing the pie, distributing the losses between themselves. But I would have thought that the overall compensation that has been put out to states for 5 years would have compensated for some part of the loss that the manufacturing states were to gain. But if the manufacturing states feel that some part of the compensation were to be equally distributed to other non-manufacturing states, so they would have a piece of this pie with that 1% additional. So I don't really know what the computations are until we get a sense of what the exact details of the compensation of the losses exactly are. It will be difficult to take a position. So, I mean, ideally we would have not wanted this 1%, and as was pointed out, I think the Congress has a point to try to ask for exemption from that 1% thing. But let's see how things work out on the floor of the House.
Satya, Poddar, I'm going to let you have the last word in this entire debate. Alcohol, petroleum, electricity out, a 1% additional levy for the states, and yet we are saying we are moving to a uniform tax regime in India. Are we being too audacious to talk about a uniform tax regime, because this is not going to be uniform?
Well, first of all, because the government is guaranteeing full compensation for 5 years, there is absolutely no fiscal need for the 1% tax. And I think the previous commentator mentioned that if the government was not going to compensate the states fully for the revenue loss, then perhaps you could make a case for continuing the 1% tax. Every single industry representation that was made before the Select Committee has unanimously criticized this 1% tax. Government officials themselves, the chief economic advisor to the government, has said that the 1% tax is detrimental to Make in India. So in spite of all of those arguments, it's really strange that the government has not seen the way out of abolishing the 1% tax. Finance Minister himself has stated in Lok Sabha that the 1% tax will not be cascading. But to this date, there is no solution provided to make it non-cascading. So given all of that, it's really unfortunate that the 1% tax has been continued. And in my view, it would have been fantastic for the government to concede the demands of the Congress party, call it a victory for the Congress, call it a victory for the government as a whole in getting the GST bill through, and they could have depoliticized approval of the GST in the Rajya Sabha, because the Congress itself has said that they are not opposed to GST in concept. And I think that was an opportunity that is missed. Now, with all these other sectors being left outside of the GST scope, I think they will not be devastating for the design of GST, but let's hope that there's still time for the government to bring in a little better GST. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this version is so flawed, I really wonder if there's any enthusiasm for this in its current form.
That's perhaps summing it up the best way possible. Wonder whether there's going to be an enthusiasm for something that is so flawed, says Satya Poddar. Thanks each one of you for being with us. Saugata, Bhattacharya, Mythili, Bhusnurmath, Harsh, Mariwala, Satya Poddar and Mukesh Butani. Thanks very, very much for being with us. We wrap it up here on the special edition of the GST coverage right here on ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.